Hi, welcome to The State Room, a podcast dedicated to covering the key issues and events that will define the future of Arizona. I'm your host, Scot Mussi. Today on our program, we're going to be doing a little post-primary recap, talking about what happened in the recent primary election, and then start covering a couple of the critical ballot measures that will be up on the ballot in November. There's several measures that voters will have to be deciding, many of which that our organization and others have worked on as well. And so we want to make sure that voters are educated and informed on these issues as we head into November. Here on the program today to discuss these issues is Aimee Yentes, Vice President of Policy and Government Affairs at the Free Enterprise Club. Aimee, thanks for coming in today.
Thanks for having me back.
So yeah, first off, talking about the primary and looking at that, and a lot of people will look at some of these different races as far as, you know, handicapping them with what's going on in November. I'm sure we'll be doing a lot of that, and everybody will be doing a lot of that for everyone that's engaged in the election process. But I always like to look at what happens in an election and try to identify the surprises. Like, what are the things that kind of shocked everybody? And I think, from my perspective, probably the most surprising thing from this primary was the lack of surprises. Like, especially top of the ticket legislative races, pretty much nothing happened that seemed surprising or out of the ordinary.
Yes, kind of a yawner for a regular primary. And obviously they moved the date back up. So a lot of people who are regular primary voters were surprised. Their ballot showed up at all. They didn't expect it. And so it was a little out of season. But
yeah, the whole thing felt kind of weird, honestly, as it was going along. You mentioned the timing of the election getting moved up because there was the one thing that I think people were talking about was how turnout was down. And it wasn't just that turnout was down among a particular party. It wasn't just Republicans. It was down across the board. Just across the board, everybody just had low turnout. And they want to talk about, well, some of these races were decided, that maybe had a part of it. But I think that moving the dates up did have an impact.
Yeah, anecdotally, I had a friend at church who I guess sheepishly admitted that she accidentally threw her ballot away, not realizing that it was her current primary ballot because it sat on her counter for a month. And so obviously that's not anything statistically significant, but I thought it was at least an anecdote that kind of confirmed our suspicion that people weren't really expecting the primary when it occurred.
Yeah, I mean, ballots went out in June. That's never happened before. And then I think having a major holiday like 4th of July, smack dab in the middle of the primary, did have an impact. And I did hear from some people that were out of town or were visiting family for a few weeks during that period where we were contacting individuals about reminding them about the vote. And yeah, they didn't know. They just had no idea that the election had started. So anyways, we'll see how that plays out in the future if we keep the dates where they're at. But probably if you look at the election, the only thing that was maybe a little bit of a surprise was way down ticket with some of these municipal races. Probably like in Gilbert, for example, all the incumbents got ousted. They all got unelected and replaced by 4 new people, which I think, at least in Gilbert in the East Valley, kind of shocked everyone because normally, especially when you're talking about municipal races, you don't see all the incumbents just end up losing like they did.
Yeah, it was a quiet election. I'm a Gilbert resident, so I didn't see a whole lot from really any of the candidates, and so I think it was an example of the voters just having their own historical in their head. They marked some names down and they shared it. There was activity, but it was all social media, primarily. And it was from, the residents themselves. There wasn't a ton that I was at least getting from candidates themselves. And so, yeah, a little bit of a revolt in Gilbert.
Yeah.
It would appear.
A little bit of a revolt. We'll see how that plays out. Beth Golden was the highest vote getter there. Hopefully, she's able to help take the council in a good direction and make sure that some of the issues that voters there are upset about get fixed, because probably the biggest issue out there was these skyrocketing water fee rates, tax rate increases. It was, and that's across the board. It's one of the reasons that we, as an organization, supported the moratorium on tax and fee increases, because there's just general anger and frustration at local governments on the endless amount of tax and fee increases that they're doing.
Oh, it's true. And that bill, when it was being debated this last session at the legislature, Gilbert was kind of the prime example. A lot of people, mayors from other communities were openly saying, well, we're not as bad as Gilbert. Like,
Yes.
don't punish us. We're not Gilbert. And so I think that's...
Spoiler alert, they're all just as bad.
Yeah, well, hopefully people have taken note, of that particular, community's election results, because it tapped into a real mood out there of the electorate.
Yeah. And now, you talk about these municipal tax increases, it's popping up now in the governor's race because Katie Hobbs just picked John Giles, the ex-mayor of Mesa. And guess what? He was one of the biggest tax hikers out there. In fact, it's already getting put out there that he pushed for a massive sales tax increase. He's pushed for all kinds of bonds that resulted in property tax increases. Big tax hiker. And now he's on the ticket with Hobbs, who, oh, by the way, has supported doubling the gas tax, doubling our state income tax. It's kind of ironic. You see, Hobbs trying to do that to Andy Biggs and say that he's a tax raiser, when now she's married the ticket to like one of the biggest local tax hikers in the state of Arizona.
Hey, light rail's not free, Scott. So you can't subsidize it for free.
That's the Hobbs Giles agenda. Let's raise taxes, light rail to globe, I guess. I don't know. It's just...
Don't give them ideas.
They're all bad, and hopefully that can be beaten back in November, and that'll take an education campaign. But one last thing related to the primary, and I'd say that if there was one thing that received bipartisan acclaim and support, was the implementation for the first time in Arizona, the allowance of ballots to be tabulated on site. So if you received an early ballot, you show up at the polls, you could now have your ballot tabulated on site. And everybody was excited about it, and it seemed like everybody wanted to take credit for it, which I thought was fascinating because there's a history here that goes along with it, that this was not an easy thing to implement in Arizona, was it?
No, and I have to, you probably won't expect this, but credit where credit's due, because this bill, our organization wrote and ran in 2022, but in 2021, when we were talking about our legislative agenda, it was you, Scott, actually, who came up with the idea and told our policy team, like, we need to do this and we need to craft legislation, and this is going to have a significant impact on speeding up our election results, which is something that gives everybody headaches every election cycle. And so, yeah, we did, and Greg from our policy team, we looked at it and crafted a very prescriptive process in statute, because that seems to be something that we typically lack in our election laws, is something that's very prescriptive. And so then, when the Secretary of State goes to give direction to all 15 counties and, put a process around that in their elections procedures manual, then, that can create a lot of differentiation in all the counties, which we like to see something more uniform. And so, we ran that bill in 2022, and at first we introduced it as mandatory, requiring all 15 counties to provide this as an option for voters.
Because the benefit is, one, it's a great service for voters, and obviously now with Maricopa and some of these other locale counties looking at doing it, voters liked it. They go, wow, my ballot can get counted, I'm done. But then on the back end, significantly speeds up results and makes things more secure.
Yeah, we know our biggest issue with getting quick election results is what they call late earlies. So everybody who opts to vote early by mail, but then doesn't vote early by mail. They show up on election day with their early ballots, and you can't just tabulate those, or you couldn't prior to this implementation, into one of the tabulators that everybody else who shows up on election day does. And they have to use different tabulators because they're two different ballots. And so, we passed that law, but at the time there was a lot of opposition to it, and primarily from the counties themselves. They said this was going to be, costly to implement. It was going to be too difficult. There was
an administrative nightmare.
An administrative nightmare. They wouldn't have enough space in their polling locations. They'd have to rethink, the footprint for all of their polling locations in order to implement
unworkable.
It. Unworkable.
Unworkable.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Everything. Ambiguous. That's what they always say.
And I'll credit a ton of the credit legislatively at the Capitol goes to Senator Mesnard, because he was the sponsor of the bill and worked the issue really hard and did a good job on it, and beating back against, again, you're right, it was these objections, and primarily from election officials at the local level, at the county level.
But there might be people might be confused because, we're saying a bill got passed in 2022. So then why haven't we had this option availed to us until 2026? And we had to make a major concession in order to get that bill passed, which was to make it permissive. So instead of requiring the counties to implement it, we said, well, you can offer it. And here's the structure and statute and how you would follow that in order to implement it. And even after we amended the bill to make it permissive, there was still very intense opposition from the counties. In fact, one of the lobbyists for one of the counties actually told us, well, we can't make this permissive because then, voters will actually like it and it'll be popular and then they'll expect us to do it. So, and go.
Yeah, it's silly us. We think that the process should be set up to serve the voters. And no, we can't have that. We can't actually have things that make things accessible and good for voters to use. No, we have to make things that cater to what the election officials want.
But on-site tabulation's having its moment now because fast forward 4 years since the bill was signed into law and Maricopa County, they all rallied around it and said, we're going to test pilot this.
Recorder heap.
Yes. And
really,
you said this was bipartisan and it was. It's funny because Adrian Fontes was even touting on KTAR prior to the election that
they all love it now.
This is going to speed up election results. So, but the proof really is in the pudding. They implemented it. It was smart to start it.
Additional just advocacy to make that happen. I mean, this was something that after we had implemented this, you did have elected officials, you had us, but you had other groups as well too saying you need to implement this because it wasn't enthusiastic. Like it took 4 years for a reason. It took.
Yes.
But honestly, another disastrous election related to timing in 2024 probably helped because we're the laughingstock of the country. You have New York Times writing op-eds saying that it's a joke that Arizona and Maricopa County can't tabulate ballots on time. And so I think that was part of it too. The pressure kept building that kind of keeping the status quo the way election officials liked it was not tenable.
Yeah, well, primary voters, they turned in around 667,000 or so ballots, and I think about 23,000 people showed up on Election Day with their early ballots, and about 30% of those chose to tabulate it. And this was the first time going. And I did hear some anecdotes from people who were out voting on Election Day saying that there was some differences in implementation, voting to vote, so the poll workers might not have been consistently offering it. So I actually think that number will increase and
as
awareness grows and training gets refined. And so I think I actually think it's transformational for our elections. And it's something that, we've obviously there's been some contention between the board and the recorder in Maricopa County. And what a bridge on-site tabulation has been. We're just we're just hands across America.
And you know what? And if everyone wants to claim success and implement it further, the point here is to do everything we can to have safe, secure elections and get election results on election night. If this gets us here and everybody's on board, that's a win for Arizona because that's all that matters. So if it's a win for Arizona voters, it's a win for the election system. And so it's good to see. And now we have the opportunity to now get it implemented statewide, mandated, because we now have an initiative on the ballot that was referred by the legislature this year that would take the program that was just in place and get it in place by 2028. I believe it's a Prop 144? 144. Yeah. That would do this on-site tabulation everywhere and get it implemented so that voters can all use it no matter where they're at, which county, all across the state.
Yep, Prop 144, and you referred to as the Fast Elections Act. So fast, accurate, secure, transparent. And so the on-site tabulation is one provision out of the 5 for that measure. And that's I think that's going to have huge bang for the buck for voters. And it's nice that they've already been able to see the results of that on this primary. So it's not theoretical. They'll be like, oh, okay, we know what this looks like. This is a good idea. But yeah, we're obviously supporting Prop 144, and on-site tabulation would be a huge component of that we would just see big gains for our election integrity.
Yeah, no, and when you talk about what voters around Arizona, and even anybody that cares around the country about making sure we get results on time, that is by far the best provision in this measure. to make that happen. Best reform.
Yes.
And this isn't about, what's happened in the past or what's going on. It's the proof's in the pudding. People liked it in the primary. Whether or not you're a Democrat or Republican, everybody liked it. There was no reason why there's a disadvantage to doing this. And so is the best reason for Prop 144, from my perspective, to pass in November.
I like all 5 provisions. If I have to rank them, this is probably 1 or 2. But
there are other very good and necessary provisions in it as well that we believe voters will support. It includes additional enhancements on making sure non-U.S. citizens can vote, restates that in the Constitution, clarifies that, puts provisions in there to prohibit foreign funding in our elections.
Yep, and that's been a big problem, especially on the national level. We've seen, billionaires who they're not citizens of our country, and yet they funnel, money through domestic organizations and try and conceal their influence conceal their influence on our elections. And so, you obviously have to be a citizen to be a qualified elector to vote in our elections. It makes sense that we also wouldn't allow, foreign citizens, but in some cases foreign adversaries, funneling their money to influence the outcomes of our elections.
It's surprisingly unclear in our state laws to prohibit that activity.
Correct.
They can't. It's prohibited that a foreign actor can't contribute to a U.S. candidate, but nothing precludes them from giving a bunch of money to a nonprofit that then goes and engages in a bunch of electioneering in the state of Arizona. And that's been going on. In fact, we found that after we did investigative work on looking at the network of the NGOs, kind of the liberal nonprofit syndicate, and discovered there were foreign actors that were funding various nonprofits that are doing tons of election activity here in Arizona. There's the Swiss billionaire. What's his name?
Hans. I can't pronounce his last name.
He's he's just not the only example. There are others as well. And stopping that foreign funding is something that needs to happen. We need to prohibit it in the Constitution. It would do that. And then lastly, the measure would implement additional ID requirements for voting.
Yeah, and close an important loophole because, and on-site tabulation is a good component of that too, because, obviously we don't we have voter IDs in our state, but we don't apply them consistently amongst all voters, regardless of the method of which they choose to vote. And so that's a big gap that, early voters aren't providing their proof of identification like on-site voters, but with the allowance of on-site tabulation, those early voters who show up, they already have to show ID in order to cast their ballot and tabulate it on-site. So that's good. But we also have this little-known loophole in our voter ID laws that allows people to use basically non-governmental issued IDs and it's called the utility provision. So you could show up with a utility bill and one other document that, has your address and your name, and you show that. It doesn't have your picture. It's not a photo ID. And so, arguably I could dig through your trash and find I wouldn't, Scott, but I could, and find documents like that and then present those in lieu of a valid government ID. And so I think that's a great provision that's in Prop 144 that, again, voters are going to be like, wow, that's common sense. Yeah, everybody has a government issued ID. Let's use that. Yeah,
Prop 144, loved by the left.
Well, maybe aside from on-site tabulation, probably not beloved by the left. There was a measure that the left was, trying to collect signatures to qualify for this ballot, and they didn't attain enough signatures. But kind of the opposite of this. So no, I would say that they're not real supportive of the provisions of this
unfortunately,
measure.
This is going to be likely contentious on the ballot, and primarily because there are things like requiring voter ID that, even though it's supported by a huge percentage of the population that think ID is a good idea, the left is just rabidly against it, whether it be the SAVE Act in Washington, D.C., or trying to do this at the state level. They're just opposed to it. They don't believe in ID to vote.
Yeah, and there's actually large swaths of their own electorate, Democrat voters who don't feel the same way. So I hope some of them take a look at this and vote their conscience, not the political talking points I think we're all going to hear. So these are good, solid reforms.
Good, solid reforms. Will probably take some education, make sure voters understand what it's exactly doing. But and there is a lawsuit right now because Fontes, our current Secretary of State, who opposes this measure. In fact, Adrian's doing something that I've never seen before out of a Secretary of State, where he's actively campaigning for and against measures that are going to appear on the ballot. Even though he's the Secretary of State and is supposed to be the election administrator, total conflict of interest. He should not be doing that. First time I've ever seen it from a Secretary of State. But in this case, he's the one that also gets to draft the ballot language, and that just got sued recently. I believe America First Legal filed a lawsuit because they're challenging that the description they used is misleading.
Yeah, and our statutes require that, when the Secretary of State crafts the ballot language, that it accurately describes the provisions and includes the main provisions so that voters know, what's actually in the measure. And so we'll see what the judges decide on that. But that's his obligation. So
we'll see what ends up happening on that. I think some of the stuff they're challenging on that is completely legitimate. I think, like a lot of the other things that he drafted for this ballot, was skewed. Clearly, he's trying to. He didn't want to pay the money to submit a ballot argument, so he decided to use, I think, the yes/no language to submit his ballot argument on the ballot there. So we'll see how that plays out. Prop 141, first measure that everybody's going to see on the ballot when they vote. First one passed by and referred by the legislature, the Freedom to Move Act, is one of those that I think a lot of people may not be familiar with on what the problem is, but once they understand this, they'll know why it's necessary and why people need to vote yes. So do you want to explain the Freedom to Move one so people can understand what's going on with that?
Yeah, this is one we crafted a couple sessions, actually several sessions ago, but it finally passed at the legislature two sessions ago, and it prohibits the government, whether that's the state or your county or a local city government or a taxing district, from taxing a citizen's vehicle miles traveled. And so, obviously right now we pay much of our roads through you go fill up your car at the gas tank, or there's,
or you pay sales taxes, because a lot of our transportation dollars are paid for through our general taxes, especially the sales tax.
Yep, there's several buckets, and so but this would prohibit the government from tapping into a new way to tax your driving by taxing every mile that you drive.
A mileage tax.
And we've seen this in other parts of the country. There's a couple dozen pilot programs that states have implemented as they've seen the erosion of gas tax dollars, trying to move into taxing every mile. We think that's just a terrible idea. California is a great,
they've been hot on the idea. There's been multiple jurisdictions there that have been trying to figure out a way to implement a mileage tax.
Yep, in San Diego, they've done it under the guise of air quality. And so to meet federal air quality guidelines, they said we have to implement a vehicle miles tax in order to curb people's choice for driving and push them towards, walking and taking public transit. And so it is a cudgel for behavioral change. Those are the policies that we're seeing in other jurisdictions. I think it was Massachusetts. There was a bill that was, I don't think it passed, but it created the architecture to pass a vehicle miles tax, but also to just have targets. So basically rations on how much people are driving. And this would actually, Prop 141 would stop that too and preempt, cities or the state or the county. Yep. Every government in the state, any political subdivision in the state, from basically setting up policies that would ration how much people drive and try and push them into other modes of transportation. Obviously, we're a sprawl. We have a lot of sprawl in Arizona. People rely on it. I mean, a vehicle mile tax would crush business. I mean, we talk about like the home builders and the trucking industry. We have.
But the only way this works though is then the government has to track you. Like the government gets to track where you're going because
You have a
it's
problem with that,
and
Scott?
reporting that because it's the only way you can make it work. So they'll tax your mileage, they'll have to track your mileage, and you'll have to regularly report that to the government. And then, as you were talking about, then set up they currently are looking at this as an opportunity to limit how much you can drive. And some of this sometimes sounds crazy to people, but we know it can't be that crazy of what's being considered because, again, California, New York, these different places, Massachusetts, that's one of they see that as a feature because they want to reduce how much people are driving. They think people drive too much. The Massachusetts example, I thought that one was crazy because that one came on the radar screen because it was being sold as the Freedom to Move Act.
Yes, that's
and
right.
I see that and I go, oh, well, they might be considering the same thing we're looking at doing here in Arizona to stop this crazy tracking and taxing mileage. But no, it was the opposite. It was
very Orwellian.
Very Orwellian gaslighting to say, oh, it's your freedom to move by taxing how much you drive and limiting how much you can move.
Well,
it's your freedom.
Freedom to walk everywhere you go in 120-degree heat.
So 141, will protect motorists. Stops mileage taxes, stops tracking of mileage, prohibits that, stops
driving rations.
Yeah, and usually on these things, when it goes to the ballot, I think when voters understand it, they get it and they're like, oh yeah, I don't want that. I agree with you. But like with any of these things, sometimes there's the issue of that. People get worried, oh, is this doing the opposite?
Well, there's like a double negative in the ballot language. And so that, I think, kind of throws people off mentally. You'd have to kind of read it 2 times to realize that it's a prohibition on the government, not a prohibition on the driver.
Or creating this.
Correct.
I think that's what people want to make sure this isn't creating it. It's banning mileage taxes and tracking, which is right now a big deal because there's a lot more discussion about these flock cameras and others and using surveillance to see what people are doing. And generally just overwhelming opposition to this. I don't think anybody wants this from our local governments. And so, but cutting through that confusion, I think is going to be important here.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yes, on 141.
Yeah. Lastly, we'll talk quickly about Proposition 318. There was a press conference on it about it this week. Save women's sports. For years now, and I think the tide has turned on this, where this idea of letting men participate, whether it be in women's sports or letting men forcing schools to require that they allow men into women's bathrooms, everything else that's associated with this. It's just felt like for years that the left and the movement behind this was going to do everything they could to force men into all these activities that have generally been safe havens for women. And the good news is it seems like the tide's turned on that. The U.S. Supreme Court just ruled, pushing back on that. That was great news. But now to ensure that we prohibit it across the board, the legislature referred Prop 318, which is the measure, the Save Women's Sports Act. And so what do you think how that's going to go as this is moving forward into November?
Yeah, I think this measure is going to be popular with voters. It doesn't just protect, our schools and the ability for girls to have, safe accommodations, but, kind of everything adjacent to the schools. So at the collegiate level and, the sports that girls and young women participate in. And so it doesn't prevent if a sport wants to be co-ed, they can be co-ed, but will require that, women's sports are women's sports and men's sports are men's sports. And then that the facilities that girls and women use will be safe to do. Yeah.
And, the parent of 3 daughters myself, this is a big issue for me personally. And I think for every parent that has this, because again, you have co-ed sports and you and your younger kids are doing that. But as they get older, it becomes a safety issue. I mean, with many of these sports that they want men to be able to play in is just insane to me. People will get hurt. It's happened. Mm-hmm. It'll continue to happen. And just not only speaking as somebody that's engaged in the political environment, but as a father, this one's really important to me because I want to make sure that that women are protected and they deserve to be protected. And it's really irritating that there is this actual movement to try to break this down and try to create an environment that we want to say that we can't even define what a woman is. And so this measure, Prop 318, will help, I think, go a long way and will ensure that happens.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we can't use, policy we passed today to rectify some of the injustices. These girls who've been on the receiving end of that injustice have had to fight to get us here. but going forward, yeah, for me too, and my 3 girls as well.
Yeah, it's going to be really important. So yes on 318 as well. Aimee, so thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks.
And for everyone watching today, thank you for joining us here in the State Room, where we will continue to cover all the big issues, especially heading into this upcoming general election, that will define the future of the state and keep Arizona free. See you again soon.